run remote, moderated, and unmoderated studies. I'm Ryan from Userlytics, the premier user testing platform to help you scale your user research affordably. Today, I'm very excited to have special guests Tan Nguyen and John Sag from Userlytics on our webinar. Both Tan and John are senior UX researchers on our team, creating research studies, analyzing results, and delivering insightful reports to many of our clients. Today, they'll be showing you how you can run remote, moderated, and unmoderated studies, comparing them with in-person studies, and talking about the main differences and benefits of each methodology. As an added bonus to being with us here today, those of you that stay all the way to the end of this webinar receive an awesome gift to help you with some of your upcoming remote studies. So stay all the way to the end to make sure you don't miss out. Just before we get going, I've got some quick technical stuff for you. First off, start putting your questions in the question section now. I'll see them, I'll keep track of them, and I'll get them to Tan and John during the Q&A portion of the webinar. I might sprinkle in a few questions in the middle of the webinar, but most will be saved for the end. So the sooner you get them in, the more likely we are to be able to answer all of them during the webinar. Also in that chat section, you'll see I'm about to place some links to Zoom support pages. If you're having any problems with audio or other general issues whatsoever, then just click on those links and follow the instructions there. If you need some additional support, I'll work with you in that chat section as well. So I'm just now putting these in the chat right now, and you should see that I have 2 links in there for you. Wonderful, you should have access to those now. So with all that wrapped up, Tan, how are you doing today?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm doing great. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So in today's webinar, we'll be discussing the advantages, challenges, and best practices for in-person, remote, and unmoderated testing. We'll go over some things that you might already be familiar with, and hopefully some things that you haven't yet explored. So our goal today is to highlight the advantages of remote research methods and help navigate, or to help you navigate this unusual time period in time, but also to provide you with more options to add to your research toolkit that you can access moving forward. So I want to start off by addressing the question that's probably on a lot of people's minds, and that's which method should I use and when? So there is no one clear way to decide which method to use because all studies are different and should be addressed on a case-by-case basis. However, we've come up with 3 questions you should ask yourself to point you in the right direction. So the first question is, does your study involve software? Is it an app or a website? Or does it involve hardware? Is it a physical product? In-person moderated studies are inherently better equipped to handle hardware because the moderator is in the same room as the participant, which allows them to observe the physical interactions as well as stepping in when participants get stuck. Remote studies, on the other hand, work best with software. The second question is, which characteristic of your study is most important? So, physical environment. Does your study require you to be physically beside the participant in a specific environment? If so, then in-person moderated might be your best choice. Flexibility. Maybe you're more concerned with having the option to probe and explore certain topics. If that's the case, remote moderated might be a better option. Logistics. Perhaps you're working on a limited budget, maybe you're pressed for time, or you're looking at tests with a large number of participants. If that's the case, then remote unmoderated might be the best choice for you. And whether it's in-person, remote, moderated, unmoderated, there are opportunities for both generative and evaluative studies. Generally speaking, in-person studies offer a wider array of options, but may not be as practical as remote studies. So let's take a deeper dive into the differences between in-person and remote moderated studies. So for an in-person study, typically takes place in a formal lab environment. You might have a one-way mirror that allows observers sitting in an adjacent room to see the participants without the participants seeing them. You may also have a number of different cameras that allow observers in the other room to see the participant and their interactions from different angles. And you also might have the option of setting up a space to simulate a specific environment, for example, a living room. So some of the advantages of in-person studies include having more control over the testing environment. Because the moderator and the participant is in the same room, that allows for physical interaction between participant, moderator, and prototype. And again, in-person moderated studies are well equipped to involve hardware. Some of the challenges, however, is that you have a limited geographical reach when it comes to participant recruitment. Things like plane tickets, hotel accommodations, and things like that can get pretty expensive when you're running in-person moderated studies. On top of that, there's a potential for biasing the participant. So because the participant is in a corporate or lab setting, it might be unfamiliar to them. They might be nervous or feel uncomfortable, and which might affect the way that they respond to your tasking questions, adversely affecting your session. And lastly, we have situations like our current pandemic where it may be unsafe to physically be in the same room as another person. So that poses some challenges when it comes to in-person moderated studies. Some of the best practices that we come up with to help mitigate some of these challenges is to first greet the participant prior to the session and ensure that they're comfortable with sharing their thoughts. You also want to stay mindful of the moderator's body language. You want to probe without asking leading questions. And a general rule of thumb for studies in general is that you want to make the session no longer than 60 minutes. Anything longer than that, you risk the participant and the moderator becoming tired and fatigued and adversely affecting the data that you acquire. So with remote moderated sessions, you'll still have a moderator who's guiding the participant through the questions and tasks, but instead of the two being in the same room, participants are typically at home. So some of the advantages of remote studies are you have less bias from body language since the moderator is sitting behind a webcam. Participants are in their natural environment. They're typically at home. In an in-person test, you might have a very specific model of iPhone and a very specific model of Android that you're using to test, whereas in a remote moderated study, you're using the participant's device, which allows you to test on a wider range of devices. You have a global reach as far as participants go. And generally speaking, remote moderated studies are less expensive than in-person studies, and which makes them also quicker and easier to complete. Some of the challenges of remote moderated studies include having less control over the environment. So the participant might be at home, they might have distractions, their kids might be around, and that could affect the session. You also have the less opportunity to use advanced testing capabilities such as blood pressure or eye tracking or anything like that. And you're typically limited to software when it comes to remote studies. Some of the best practices for remote moderated studies include quickly introducing the participants to the platform prior to the session. So you want them to know where the mute button is. If they need to mute, you want them to know where the sharing the screen button is in case they need to share their screen. And you also want to consider which platforms may be inhibited by corporate firewalls. A lot of the remote testing platforms require participants and the moderator to download an app or some sort of software to run the test. However, we're happy to announce that with our new moderated tool, it's built into the browser, so it doesn't require any sort of downloading of app or software, which helps get by those corporate firewalls. Again, so some of the challenges of moderated studies, whether it's in person or remote, is that the moderator has the ability, some of the advantages of moderated studies, whether it's in person or remote, is that the moderator has the ability to be flexible and adapt to the conversation he or she is having with the participant. So I'll now show you a clip of our new moderated tool in action, where you can get, where we get to ask participants questions on the fly as they interact with the website. Pause here for a sec. And you mentioned the CDC. Have you visited their website in the recent past?
Yeah, so I have chronic Lyme disease, and the CDC and people that have my thing have like a history. So I was already visiting the CDC website fairly frequently before I got sick. And then as soon as as soon as the press conferences started with Trump and Dr. Fauci, I began visiting it more regularly. And I've been visiting the main CDC website at least once a day, if not twice a day.
Okay. So prior to the pandemic, did you find the CDC helpful or unhelpful?
No, but I think that's just because of the situation that I'm in with my particular condition.
Okay, so for the next task, I'd like you to go ahead and visit the CDC.
Okay, so do you want me to use this search result that came up?
Just probably best to go to their homepage.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, so I think it's just cdc.gov if I remember correctly. And I'm assuming like the main page, they have they still do.
Okay, so let's pause on this page for a second. So does this look familiar to you?
Yeah.
Does it look the same or different as the last time you visited the website?
The same.
Okay. And then so without clicking on anything, but you feel free to use your scroll wheel, could you just give me your impressions on the page?
I actually don't think I've scrolled down the page since I started to come to it. I've just clicked here, so.
Got it.
Oh, they have a thing about cloth face covering. I love that. Limit your exposure.
Okay, so that's the clip of our moderated tool in action. And so now that we've explored some of the differences between in-person and remote moderated studies, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, John, who will go over the differences between moderated and unmoderated studies.
Thanks so much, Tan. I appreciate it. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. So, with unmoderated sessions, unmoderated remote sessions, any kind of remote session, really, participants are relying strictly on the on-screen instructions that are programmed into the platform and to any kind of platform, including our own prior to the session. And there's a lot of flexibility there. It's not quite as flexible as, having a live moderator being able to respond to everything that's happening. But, you are relying on a participant to kind of steer themselves through the study, and there's a lot of tricks and things you can do to kind of make it the best, a solution possible. And keep in mind that really the main benefit of remote sessions are the scalability of it. So, there's sort of an old myth that you can get away with coming up with 85% or so of the issues in a particular app, or website, or piece of material that you're studying with just 5 to 7 participants. And this is something Jared Spool, who's a great speaker on UX studies, great user researcher with Center, talks about this in great detail. How really, depending on the size of what you're working on and everything else that you're doing in the study, kind of dictates how many participants you need. But remote studies allow you to really scale up an entire study or test very easily. So the advantages of doing some unmoderated remote studies, right? You have a shorter turnaround time for recruitment and results. You have larger studies with more participants. It's obviously less expensive, and the high scalability of it means you can create it, you can launch it, you can expand it to different groups. You can slice and dice it however number of ways that you want, and it's very easy to get through testing a wide variety of applications very quickly. There are some challenges. The test is obviously a little less flexible because there's no moderator involved to steer the session. So they're not able to necessarily come back from problems or issues that you encounter. You can get around that challenge by setting little guideposts and conditionals within your test, something that our platform does. You can ask them, for example, if they're supposed to get to a certain part of the site as part of the questioning and the tasks they're doing. And you can ask them, did you get to that part of the site? And if not, you can then present them with another task that has a link to the page that you wanted them to be at when you start to ask them the next few questions or have them go through the next set of tasks. Obviously, you can't probe the unexpected or unforeseen directions or happenings that go on, stumbling blocks, pain points that they might hit while they're using your app or your website or what have you. But that's also hugely valuable. You get to see both them hitting those pain points and roadblocks and how they work to overcome them, or if they even do it all. You might see participants work around a problem within a site or an app or some sort of prototype and find a path that you didn't think about. You may see them give up because it's just too hard. These are all really valuable insights that you're going to get. Participants may misunderstand tasks and questions, which is okay too. I mean, that's sort of a challenge that we deal with every study, but we battle those. We get over those challenges by just trying to keep things as simple and singly focused on each task and question that we ask, so we don't overwhelm anybody with too many questions or too many tasks to do in one go, in one part of the study. And obviously, you can't react to technical issues in real time. You can help to mitigate those things, but those things always exist. And in those situations where someone just couldn't complete the test, the good thing is you're going to have a lot of results, so you can start to reject a few that they have on for their internet goes out, their web browser stops working or something like that, where there's nothing you can do to control it. Those happen in moderated sessions as well. And in some cases, we can try and help them troubleshoot, or we just have to say, sorry, this wasn't working out. You had technical issues, like we'll try again some other time. So the best practices, ensure that your questions and your tasks, the things that you put in front of their remote participants, is very clear and succinct. Keep it clear, concise, and brief as possible. You don't want to influence what they're going to do. You don't want to give them the answer to the question before they find it themselves. So brevity is important. We can use skip and branching logic, just like I mentioned in a previous example. You can ask them if they've completed something correctly. You can move them to different parts of the remote study based on the answers that they provide to questions, whether they're successful or not. Or depending on if they go down a different path. If you give them an open task to go find a particular page, like a contact us, you can ask them how they got there, and then you can give them different tasks or questions based on what they actually did. So that logic really helps to bridge the gap between the benefits of remote and moderated studies. Consider the amount of time a participant may spend on each task. You have a kind of a median. Some people are very quick. Some people take their time and really read over a page and give a lot of verbal feedback. So, we design it usually to take around 20 minutes or so, and we allow around a half an hour to complete it. Some people complete it in that 20 minutes, and some people may take up to 40 minutes to complete the tasks. So it just depends. A rule of thumb is hard to come up with because it depends on every single test. We've seen anywhere from, more complex tests that are really only allow for 2 or 3 tasks and some questions and survey items in between. And then we've seen really simple, more direct studies be able to manage, 8, 9, 10 tasks in a study that lasts 30 minutes because each of the asks of the participants are very easy. So just depends on your study, but once you've programmed the entire thing in, you can ask people to run through it for you. You can run through it yourself just to get an idea of how it goes. And there's a lot of different data gathering pieces that are part of remote studies. Besides just tasks and questions, you ask some survey questions, you can have them do tree tests, you can have them do card sorts. We have some examples of some of the remote studies we've done. One example, at least, in the next slide, so we can show it to you and kind of give you an idea of what a remote study looks like. This is an unmoderated tree test, so someone is going through a navigational layout to try and find a link to something, and you can see that you get all kinds of insights from someone trying to go through that. So go ahead and play that one.
So I'm looking for women's tracksuit. So let me read that. Now you will be shown a collapsed menu. Please find and click on the correct category for women's tracksuit by searching the menu and, if necessary, submenus. Navigate the items you would click on to discover the desired location, and when you have found it, click I choose this. Okay, so I'm looking for a women's tracksuit. And I have women's fashion, men's fashion, phones, telecommunications, office, computer office and security, consumer electronics, jewelry and watches, home, pet, appliance, bags, and shoes. So I definitely going to look under women's fashion. Okay, so bottoms, outerwear and jackets, weddings and events, tops and sets, accessories. So I believe I would look in tops and sets since I'm wanting a tracksuit. So we have t-shirts and tops, cardigans, women's sets, jumpsuits, bra sets, intimate, sleep, and lounge. Okay, so not quite. I don't think it would really be a jumpsuit. I kind of think of that as being all one piece. So I think that I would look into the women's sets, and then there is the women's tracksuit. That kind of.
So you can get an idea, from just this one user, how much difficulty she may have had in finding that one item, and then multiply that by multiple questions and multiple participants. So maybe just 3 or 4 people having a difficulty may not be really statistically significant for you, but if we did that same remote study with 30 or 40 people, you would start to see really obvious patterns emerge about where your navigation or where your organization makes sense to people and where their mental models don't really match what you're trying to convey. And that's really the benefit above all of remote moderated studies, remote studies in general, is the scalability, the ability to easily spin up a test and have it completed by a large number of people in basically any slice of demographic or any kind of piece of information about the user that you want to work with. We can tailor those tests for very specific needs, very specific audiences, and then be able to slice and dice that and get those results very quickly. So how to launch a test in general, there's some steps that are really good to follow when you want to launch a test. The first one being, identify the research and the goals. Work with your stakeholders, work with the people that you're doing this, your clients or whoever you're doing this job for, and find out what kinds of questions do they want to have answered. What are the goals they're trying to accomplish by doing this study, by asking these questions, by understanding how participants or users are going to use their software, right? This is a very user-centered discipline. This is a very user-centered operation. You want to understand what your users' mental models are, how they're going about these tasks, how they approach. Everyone approaches things from a different background, right? Everyone has a different idea of how things are supposed to work. We do have some commonalities, but you're looking for the areas where there may be stumbling blocks, pain points, or new opportunities for improvements or expansion of your application or website based on the results. So work on those questions, work on those goals, get everyone together and have everyone agree on what those things are. That's really that foundational work really lays the groundwork for the success that's going to come later. The second is prepare those test assets and everything else you're working with, prototype, a live website, an app that you're going to be launching, how you're going to launch it, if you're going to launch it, with some sort of a testing platform on iOS or Android. Prepare those assets, get them all ready to go, run through them to make sure that everything is succinct, and if you're using passwords to get into the site, make sure that they're easy to understand. Don't make them too complicated. Next, determine your appropriate research method, the platforms and tools you're going to be using, right? If you want to go a moderated study, you can even mix and match. You can do some moderated studies to kind of get maybe some stakeholders involved and seeing some early results from, and some questions answered from some of the things you're working on. And then you can also at the same time launch a remote study on the same platform to get some additional questions answered, or, to get a larger data set to work with when you're really asking some of these questions. Next, you can design a test script, a moderator. You don't need necessarily to do both, but you definitely need the test script for any kind of test that you're launching. And we can, Userlytics can help you with designing that test script. You can do it on your own, and we can help guide you on changes to it if they're needed. But just get that script together, the questions you want to answer, the sort of the layout of tasks that you want the participants to try out, and see how long you think it's going to take. Really guide yourself through that process and see, is this too much? Are we covering too much? Usually the answer is probably yes. You're probably asking way too many questions and covering too much in one script. You want to keep it fairly simple because you're going to get a lot of data from even the simplest of studies. So, try to keep it pared down as much as you can. Keep it as simple as possible so you don't stretch yourself too thin. Ask your participants to do so much and perhaps even miss some really key guidance that would come out of a simpler test. And then recruit or schedule your participants, whether you're doing remote, moderated, unmoderated, or just remote unmoderated studies. You can work with participants that you have, or you can use a Userlytics panel. We can slice and dice those audience numbers and groups down to very specific locations, regions, ages, what their jobs are, all those kind of things. And we've seen really successful tests with participants that are provided by a client. One example I can think of is a major health network. They were designing some new pages and new sites for people that work in the company to use. Not quite an intranet, but sort of like a group of resources and tools that they would need to get access to that was public but was mainly for them. So we used participants from within the system that had no connection to this work that was going on, but they just wanted to understand how people from their own company, it was a massive company with over 100,000 associates, how they were using these tools, what was working for them now, and to test some prototypes to see how well they would work with changes. And then at the end of that, after your studies have run, analyze those results and deliver those insights. That's something that we're very used to doing because we've done a lot of that work on our own. We can show you how to analyze those results. The results that you are going to be gathering will be in a dashboard where you can see all the metrics based on the studies. You can see things like Net Promoter Scores and answers to survey questions, time on task, how well they've finished a task, if anybody's failed tasks, all kinds of things. There's going to be a lot of metrics that you can gather just based on how you've created that test script and how you've identified those questions and goals. So I think now one of my colleagues here, Ryan, is going to show you how to create a test on our platform, just so you can get an understanding of how it gets put together.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. And this would be the Userlytics dashboard. Just going to spend a couple of minutes to show you how easy this process is. So we can see we have a few tests that are created in draft mode, other ones in running, others that have been closed here. When you want to create a new test, you just hit this Create New Test button. And it's basically just going to be 6 steps here along the top. And it's very easy to do. These first 4 steps take about 5 to 10 minutes, go really quick. This step right here can take a little bit longer, but this is exactly like John pointed out earlier, that we can definitely help you make your study as well, and that would drastically speed that time up. Each of these steps is very easy. So you basically just come over here and say if you want to do a prototype test, a website test, if you'd like to do a moderated test or unmoderated test. So we have a lot of different choices here for you. Moderated would bring up a 7th step where you would be scheduling the time with the participants, and you can come over here very easily and see the time zone, and then any of these times will work out for you. You can just easily say, when my participants qualify for the study, I would like for them to meet me on these hours, so that way they have some choices to go through as well. But whatever you decide to do on our platform, you'll see that we can record the webcam or not, completely up to you. We have many different testing languages, including many Asiatic, European, and American languages. We can always add more languages there if you have another request. Then sourcing the participants, if you want to access our panel, is very easy. If you want to bring your own participant, it's just a click of a button, very simple to do. And you can see we have all kinds of device types from desktop to smartphone to tablet. And then within our panel, you have some good filtering capabilities like gender, age, or some advanced filters like maybe employment status or income. And if any of these aren't specific enough, or if you want to do something that isn't a default filter that we have here, we do have screener questions with an unlimited number of screeners. And you can easily either drag and drop questions into an order that makes sense to you, or come from our popular sample questions. For example, what industry do you work in? We already have that one defined for you. You can easily come over here and delete options, rename options, do whatever else you want. You can qualify or disqualify people kind of however you want, or send them to follow-up questions just to make sure you're getting the exact participant you're looking for coming from our panel, if that's the pathway you choose to do. In the actual task itself, you'll see that we have many question types, as John was alluding to earlier, like card sorting, tree testing, Net Promoter Score, system usability scale. And once again, just as our screener, you can just drag and drop these in here very easy. And then in any order that kind of makes sense for the study that you're looking to create. And then the final order of business would just be to go through and run through a preview to make sure the spelling is correct, the branching logic inside of our test makes sense, to make sure the test order is working and everything is coming together as you expect. And then you launch that result. And depending on the participant profile you're going for, we'll likely get the first few results in a few hours and have all the results for you in about 12 to 18 hours if you're going for broad-based demographics, in which case we'll also watch the video and make sure it's going to be a good result. So there's no technical issues. The participant is talking out loud, just to make sure you really are getting all those valuable insights that you're looking for. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump over to the next session. And right as I do, I'll say that we're about to enter the QA, but if you can go ahead and start putting your questions in the QA, then we can get to those here in just a minute. But just before we get to the QA, I guess, Tan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen again, wonderful. Just before we do get to the QA, I'd like to pass you a little gift. After this webinar, as I mentioned earlier, everyone here will be getting Premier access to a gift, and that Premier access is going to be access to our moderated beta if you don't already have it already. And more than that, everyone who's here will also get 2 free panel credits to launch your first moderated study completely free of charge. This gift will provide you a full 60-minute moderated session where we provide you with a broad-based participant, or you can provide your own participant, as John was talking about also, as well as all of our advanced analysis tools to help you easily run your first remote study and extract as many valuable insights as possible. We understand that you might have some questions right now about how to access the free gift, so we'll be providing more information in a follow-up email later today for how you can join our platform, how you can get your first study set up, how you can source your first participant for free, how to sign up for a personalized walkthrough if you want, and anything else you may need. To prove I really mean it, I'm going to put my personal email address here in the chat for everyone to see. So I just got to open this chat back up. Awesome. So you guys should see that in there right now. And so if you don't hear from us within 24 hours with next steps, or if you have a burning question that you really want help with, shoot that question my way, and I'll be sure to help out. All right, cool. Let's get to some of these questions. We had one question come in early, and we're just going to start there. And then after that, I've seen a few questions have come in so far, so we'll go through and answer them in order. So this would be for both Tan and John, but I think, John, you mentioned it kind of briefly in the part that you were talking about, but for both of y'all, Tan, going first, please. How many participants would you recommend having for a moderated study? And how long would it take to complete the full moderated study?
It depends. I'm sorry to say that it depends on the type of test you're doing and what you're working on. You know, you can have good results from just a handful of moderated participants, say 5 to 10. But if your test is more complex, or if you want to do iterations down the line and then re-evaluate and test with additional people, it would go up from there. I would say it would be good practice to err on the side of trying to get a few more than you think you might need, only because there's always going to be some challenges with scheduling, someone having technical problems. You know, I would say most of the moderated sessions we run, we always run into, if we get about 10, 15 people responding that, you know, scheduled and we're good to go, we usually miss maybe 1 or 2 of them at a time, just because something comes up in their personal life and they can't make the session and we have a hard time getting back together with them. Just happens with everybody. If something always comes up, I would say maybe if you moderated sessions right now, given the situation we all find ourselves in across the globe, you probably have your best chance of getting all of your participants available and ready to answer your questions now, because we're all stuck at home. So, you know, you could probably get away with doing a 5 to 10 if you wanted to start a remote study. Even 1, though, I mean, I want to say we have encouraged people who have come to us with wanting to do kind of a split style test where they do both a moderated part of the study and a remote study, to just do at least 1 moderated, just so you can see people using your website or your app. It's very eye-opening for stakeholders, for people who are involved in these processes, to see real users in real time use their the thing that they created, or the thing they had a hand in creating. And that generates all kinds of additional thoughts and questions and discussions back at the company they work at. I was watching a user use this, and they did this, and they asked this. All these things they might never even thought of, especially, you know, product owners, people in the product teams and in the IT teams that don't really get exposure to the users all the time, like sales does, you know, and they don't really necessarily get to see this stuff firsthand. When they see it firsthand in a study like this, it generates all kinds of ideas and thoughts and hopefully excitement in the company or in your organization to do more studies. And Tan, I'll turn it over to you. You probably have some insight there too.
That was great, John. Thank you so much. I just want to add on to a little bit of what you were saying. And when it comes to you know, convincing stakeholders and convincing people in your organization and enacting change, then, you know, it's kind of like the more participants, the higher sample size that you have, the more convincing your data becomes. So especially if you're using some sort of quantitative analysis and metrics. But for evaluative usability tests, you can get away with a smaller sample size. But when it comes to generative or quantitative tests, then you'd probably be best going with a larger sample size.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you both for that. We had another one come in, and I'll just direct this next question towards John, just because Tanya was the last person to speak there, so thank you. So John, how specific should questions be for an unmoderated session?
You can get as specific as you think would glean you the information you need. Again, if you're putting it into a task, you don't want to be too specific because you don't want to give away the answer. Example might be, hey, go through this page for a few minutes. If you wanted to contact the company to get a question answered, how would you do that? Don't immediately right after that ask a question, did you find our contact link at the bottom in the footer? Because now you've told them how to do it, you've kind of short-circuited their thought process, and now they just know the answer. But afterwards, after you've had the participants try a task, you can ask very specific follow-up questions. You could have them, for the contact example, you could have them go through the whole process, ask them after that, were you able to find the contact information? And then after that, you can ask a very specific question. We put the contact information in the far right menu, under contact us. Was it clear that that's where it was? Was anything preventing you from finding it there? Was the wording contact us not clear enough? Should we have used something else? What would you suggest? I mean, you can get very specific with your questions as long as you don't give away the answer before you give folks the opportunity to try.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and just to add on that a little bit, when it comes to unmoderated studies, since the participants are answering tasks and questions that are pre-programmed into the platform, and there's no moderator there to kind of clarify if there's any confusion, you want to make sure that your questions are really clear.
Mm-hmm.
If it can be misinterpreted, it probably will be by some people. So you definitely want to, take that into consideration. And if you have the means, then run a pilot, run a dry run, and make sure everything works out.
Wonderful. Thank you. And for this next question, we'll do it the other way around. So if Tan, you can start, and John, if you have any follow-up, then that'd be wonderful. So Tan, are there any differences when sourcing B2B or B2C profiles for remote moderated studies? You mentioned a corporate firewall in one of your slides. Does that mean that B2B profiles won't work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to the participant actually going through and taking the test, it's exactly the same for B2B or B2C. However, if you're doing B2C, and maybe you're working with people within your organization or from other organizations that have corporate firewalls, then there is a concern there as far as them being able to use that platform. And again, so our Userlytics, our new moderated tool, actually works on the browser, so that helps bypass those corporate firewalls.
And I would add to that, don't be surprised when your B2B users end up using their personal accounts to take these tests. And not all the time do they use their corporate computers or their corporate email addresses to sign up as participants or to join the link. We did a few B2B studies where folks were just already at home and use their own personal Gmail accounts or what have you to facilitate the session. So, we already know who they are. We may have communicated with them with their corporate email, but when it came time to do the test, they may have decided just to use their personal accounts for whatever reason. So that's always a possibility too. Corporate firewall issues don't necessarily always have to be a problem for you.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's also been a couple questions that have come in about our platform. So I'll go ahead and answer a couple of these, and then we can kind of move on to some other questions. So is the moderated live convo session a separate fee than usability test panel credits? In our platform, no. In our platform, you would purchase panel credits, and those panel credits would allow you to do unmoderated studies, moderated studies, to source participants from our panel, to hire our professional services, and all kinds of things like that. So basically, if you have an account with us, you can use those panel credits for kind of whatever you want to do. And then in our plans, we do have all of our features like highlight reels, audio transcriptions, and everything like that would just come standard. So there would be no additional fee for any one of those. And then I think there was another one here related to our platform. Yeah. So screening and recruiting users. What does it look like in the platform? Is there a screening questionnaire pop-up? What if a user takes a screening questionnaire and doesn't qualify to proceed? This is a wonderful question as well. Basically, we have a little screening section that comes first. And so the user would get taken to a URL, to a page that could either be hosted on their mobile device or their desktop device, where they would actually go through and answer some screener questions, the screener questions that you've come up with. And then once they finish those, if they qualify for the test, they will automatically get moved on to either in the unmoderated test itself or the scheduling option for the moderated study, so that they can go through and schedule a time that works for them. So what that means is if an individual does not qualify for the session, then they will not be able to either take the test or go in and actually set up a time. And then another one here, this might be related to something we had, but if you guys have some different way to look at this, this could be helpful. It says, in your opinion, so I guess we'll start with John, if it's good. John, in your opinion, how many remote tests is enough to start to see patterns and trends or issues? So this might be related to the number of participants, but if you want to take another angle at it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you mean number of participants or number of tests. The answer to the test question, is, I would say patterns and depending on what you're testing, even the simplest patterns and the simplest results, one study, 5 participants would be enough to start seeing some sort of pattern. Depending on how complex your study is, how complex your app or test is, I think it's valuable, personally, I think it's valuable to get results, even if it's from a small number of people. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to get much better results the more people that you use. You're going to start to see much bigger trends. You're going to start to understand, and the more people that you add to the test, from our experience, the more issues you will find that arise. And I'm sure there is a magic number where you can hit for your particular study, where you're really not going to get much benefit beyond that number. But I feel like that number is something that we never really ever reach with most people. Because you add another 10 participants, they may find 2 or 3 more things, maybe 4 or 5 more things that you hadn't considered. It goes back to the mental model question, where everyone kind of comes at everything from a slightly different perspective. They have different experiences, they have different behaviors, they have different equipment that they're working on. So it can feel overwhelming, but certainly with a minimum number, I think starting with 5, starting with 10 for 1 or 2 tests is a good starting point for just about anything. And the fewer number of participants that you have, I would start to keep the tests that you're running a bit simpler. Keep it to one site, keep it to one app, keep it to one section of a site or one section of an app, and then determine, and most people they'll want to build upon it from there.
Awesome. Dan, do you have anything to follow up to that?
Yeah, just one thing. So when you're running evaluative research, so for example, you might be testing a platform like an app or a website, then you're going to start to see patterns more quickly with smaller sample sizes because your scope is more narrow. But when it comes to generative research and your scope is more broad and you're looking for opportunities for innovation, for example, then you're going to want a larger sample size before you see any sort of before you can confidently point to a pattern.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And because you happen to mention generative, I'm going to take these questions a little out of order. There was another question that came up, said, you mentioned generative user research in the early stage of the presentation. Do you have any generative specific features? And I'll go ahead and let you go take this one first, Dan.
Yeah, so most of the pre-designed questions on our platform are geared towards evaluative research. We do have a few that are geared towards generative, but generative is a little bit tricky because it varies on a case-by-case basis, right? It really depends on what you're looking for. And if you find yourself in a position where you have difficulty coming up with a script or asking the right questions, then obviously we're here. We're always here to help. So feel free to reach out to us and we can hop on a call, brainstorm some ideas, and hopefully guide you in the right direction as far as designing a test.
Yeah, I just like to add to that that the platform that we're using right now, the platform that we work on every day, we use generative research in our own platform in our own ways to try and come up with new insights and new ways to do things. So, certainly it's almost limited basically to your imagination of whatever questions you come up with, whatever things you want to study. You can use any of the platform tools we have to meet that goal.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I can see that Natalia put in the Q&A, if you can show again the slide with the explanation of generative versus the other type of research. I don't remember what slide that was referencing, but maybe we can go back a few slides and show that once again. And just so it's clear, just to remind everyone, we will be passing out this recording likely sometime tomorrow. So you should be able to see all that again there. But yeah.
We've done generative research for remote unmoderated. I'll speak to that for customer journeys. Just getting an idea. We do it a lot with major retailers, for example. How do people go about finding a particular product or a particular class of products? How do people shop when they shop for things? It's a big question that we get asked quite a lot. So it's something we're used to asking of our participants. And those can be very open-ended, and we utilize the platform tools that we have, annotations, highlight reels, the ability to ask very pointed questions at different times based on how they're experiencing the site or app that they're using to kind of glean those insights. And we spend a lot of time watching videos to understand how users are experiencing the web world around them.
Wonderful. And while we leave this slide up, I'll go ahead and go into the next question as well. So Natalia, you can read the slide and check this out as we move on a little bit. So Tan, this is a question that just came in. When you are moderating your remote test, what are the key things you should know as a moderator?
Yeah, so anything that applies to the general rule of thumbs that apply to in-person moderated tests also apply to remote moderated tests. But you also have to keep in mind the fact that you're speaking to the participant, behind a webcam, behind a computer screen, and they might be in their home and they might have distractions. They might have kids, and especially in this weird time where everyone seems to be working from home and staying at home, you just want to stay cognizant of that, and it's okay to bring that up and let the participant know that it's this. We understand what they're going through. We're going through the same thing. That way, just to keep the participant and the moderator on the same page, building that rapport and providing that foundation for them to share their thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, I always let people, when I'm moderating studies, I always let people know, listen, there's no wrong answers. We're not testing you based on what you're doing or how you use the internet. We just want to understand more about how everyone uses this app or this website. So there are things you can say to them. There's, build a good rapport with that person. We do a lot of that to make sure that they feel comfortable. And, you do your best to kind of fade into the background as much as possible. We don't want to. We've done a lot of moderated studies in our lives, so we've kind of learned the tricks and the ways to kind of stay out of the equation as much as possible so we don't affect what they're doing. They will ask us questions. There's always a little bit of some folks that we test with, there's a tendency that they want to, please the moderator, please, try and do the thing that we think they want them to, that they think we want them to do. We take steps to try and avoid that stuff so that they provide us the best possible feedback and they feel comfortable doing it. And they know that it doesn't matter what they tell us. It doesn't matter if they have something negative to say about the particular site or app that they're using. It won't hurt our feelings because we didn't build it. So we let them know that so they can feel comfortable with whatever they're going to tell us.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we do have a few more questions here in a few more minutes. So hopefully we can get to all of these before time is up. Another question just came in. How do you derive insights from research findings? And I guess we'll start with you, John, since we started with Tan last time.
So there's a lot of different ways that we do that. We look obviously for patterns and things that happen. So if we're looking at like a website, we can let let the people that we're working for know, hey, people got stuck in this particular area, or the answers to the survey questions, here's kind of the spread of how that was answered. We use a lot of different, it's a very wide scoping question because we ask a lot of different kinds of questions, and we use a lot of different graphs, experience logs, annotations, highlight reels, all sorts of things to kind of come to the conclusion. And usually we refer back to those questions that I mentioned towards the end of the presentation. Those research questions that you or together with us have generated to answer, we go back and we find the answers to those questions as well while we're doing our analysis of the results. So if you wanted to know if people finding a certain thing, or they're getting caught up in a certain place, or what is their experience, or what is their journey, or what, all those kinds of questions, we look at those to answer them throughout the report that we generate.
Yeah, and to add to that, the beauty of running research in general is that you're going to get your you're going to get your questions answered, but you're also going to get answers that you weren't looking for, that end up being really important. So it's the value really is to just run the test and continue the test, and to test your platform, test your system, and also run tests to explore areas for improvement.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We have 2 more questions that hopefully we can squeeze in here really quick. And then the other ones we might just have to answer through email or something else afterwards. One of them is, what are the benefits of using the platform versus a simple video conferencing tool? And I'll just answer this real quick, that it has to do with the fact that we have a large participant panel. If you decide to go with an unmoderated study, we can usually have, let's say, 10, 15, 20 results less than 24 hours later, which drastically speeds up the time. If you're doing moderated, then we have easy scheduling inside of our platform, and then easy moderating capabilities, and then, of course, the participant panels I was talking about. But then whether you do unmoderated or moderated, we have really good resources around so that you can analyze results very quickly, and thus drastically saving you time, and in many cases providing participants that you wouldn't be able to do normally. And so I just want to get that real quick. But the last question, as we are hitting the hour, this will probably be the last one we get to today. I'll start with you, John, and if you could follow up, Tan. It's a little bit longer question, but it paints a good picture that would probably be relevant for everyone here. Do you have any tips for recruiting participants? The company I work for wants to test with our customers, but when we reach out to get participants, we rarely get any responses. We're currently showing a pop-up when users log into our system as a means to invite users to our studies. So, John, if you have any ideas, love to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen different ways that this is tackled. One way is that you offer some sort of a compensation or a discount on products or what have you for people who participate. That usually generates a fairly good response. I would caution against pop-ups. People tend to dismiss those because they're seen as sort of a block to what they were trying to get accomplished. There are other ways that you can put those sorts of messages on your website to get people to answer. One way I could think of is at the end of, say, hey, thanks for, making this purchase. Would you mind ever, joining one of our research studies? You could, email them, put that in the question at the end of like their receipt or something like that. Or if you do any kind of newsletter, you can put it in there. That is a challenge for everybody, and especially if you have any concerns with your customer base, or the customer base kind of comes and goes really frequently and they're not really very highly engaged. If you do have some engaged customers, repeat customers, people who contact or reach out to your company quite often, or you have some sort of a method that you communicate with customers, like if you have forums or an email box or a chat thing or what have you. If you have any of those businesses where you welcome and you take in any kind of feedback from your customers, that's a good place to source people that would most likely be able to take part in some kind of a study, because they've already gone through the effort of reaching out to you guys. So they're most likely to want to take part in further studies or answering further questions to help, improve your company, improve your product or the website, whatever.
And to add to that, you want to mention how the insights will be used so that the potential participant understands, the value that they're contributing to the company or to the study. And also you want to identify and address barriers that might get in the way of people wanting to participate in a test. For example, maybe someone in a company is reluctant to participate in the test because they're fearful of, their feedback being received negatively, for example. So if that's the case, you want to address it, make them know, let them know that their feedback isn't going to hurt your feelings, or perhaps maybe even consider using an external consultant to conduct the test rather than using someone from the same company.
Awesome. Thank you very much for those detailed answers. Dan and John, thank you for everything you've helped with today. And to you who did stay all the way to the end of the webinar with us, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to learn with us here. We hope that between the informative talks Dan and John gave, the free remote moderated study provided by Userlytics, and the detailed Q&A that once again Dan and John have done a wonderful job with, you'll be leaving this session with a bunch of new capabilities to run your next remote moderated and unmoderated studies well. As mentioned before, be on the lookout for a follow-up email, likely tomorrow, which will have this recorded video in full, along with both Dan and John's slides in PDF form, as well as the instructions to help you set up your first remote moderated or unmoderated study and the Userlytics platform for free. If you have any questions regarding our platform, setup, pricing, or anything else, I have shared my email address in the chat earlier with y'all. You can also reach out to us at ux@userlytics.com at any time. And I'm also just putting that email in the chat as well. So if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help out. And to wrap things up, make sure you stay on the lookout for our follow-up email that will have this webinar recording in full and the instructions for how you can set up your first study for free. With all that being said, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.